In the last financial year, over 23,000 households were disconnected across New South Wales, the ACT, South Australia, Tasmania, and Victoria. And at least 20 times more electricity consumers were at risk of being disconnected. And the threat of disconnection is spreading socially. It's no longer a problem for low-income households. It's also affecting middle-income households. It's a threat of mental, social, and physical health, not only to the account holders, but also to their family members. And disconnection, there's enough evidence out there, has proven ineffective in helping households manage their financial burdens. Research in the United States suggests that policies limiting utility disconnections during the COVID-19 pandemic has had positive impacts on public health and the financial stability of households. It's reduced infections and deaths, reduced credit delinquencies. So researchers and consumer advocates are really calling for a ban of disconnections, electricity disconnections, in Australia as well as elsewhere. So we did a literature review and explored prohibitions of residential electricity disconnections for non-payment in exemplary jurisdictions. So those nations that are always put forward as being good examples, and those are France, Spain, and Ireland. They have comparatively low disconnection rates and a largely liberalised electricity market like Australia. So I worked with researchers in those countries to understand how their disconnection bans work and how their rules and findings and outcomes compare to the build contracts in the eastern states and territories, so everything within the national energy market. So disconnection bans is quite an umbrella term, we found out. It covers varied forms of protections from grid electricity supply. So we distinguish between 4 types of disconnection prohibitions, and there are also a few sort of emergency measures out there. So year-round disconnection prohibitions by law for registered life support customers are there in Spain and Ireland, as long as they're registered, but not in France. In Ireland, everyone who's paying off their debt and being engaged is also protected from being disconnected. And in Spain at the moment, because of emergency measures, everyone who's on a social bonus. Then there are disconnection moratoria, so winter truce periods. In France, it's for all customers, but those who haven't paid, they are reduced to a supply of 3 kilovolt amperes. But anyone who's on an energy voucher scheme doesn't get reduced supply. And in Ireland, registered vulnerable customers are not being disconnected during the winter truce period. At the moment, it's for all customers because of emergency measures, but it's a shorter period. And then there are disconnection moratorium that are extended timelines to pay and basic individual supply mechanisms for some protected households. So in France, those are the energy check customers, so they get longer time to pay their bills and also a longer time on that individual supply mechanism, but it's only 1 kilowatt amperes. In Spain, usually vulnerable and severely vulnerable householders get more time to pay, and they're also much longer on a reduced supply of 3.5 kilowatts. So they get up to 10 months extension to pay, but at the moment, because of the emergency measures, all social bonus customers are not allowed to be connected. And in Catalonia, anyone who's disconnected, so retailers can't disconnect anyone before they haven't checked with social services if those people fall into one of the vulnerability categories. And then the 4th category are voluntary continuous disconnection restraints by energy companies. So in France, EDF maintains a minimal power supply of 1 kilovolt amperes. In Catalonia, so that's an autonomous authority within Spain, Endesa has entered an agreement with the Catalonian government not to disconnect anyone who's signed up with them. There's been a huge debt waiver, and there are debt sharing with the Catalan and the local governments. And in Ireland, since 2014, all retailers, and it's 8 out of 12 retailers there, who have signed up to the voluntary Energy Engage code never connect an engaged customer. So what does it mean? There are diverse perceptions of vulnerability and who should be protected. Income, age, health, disability, gender violence all feature somewhere in there. But there's no evidence that protection from disconnection may be based on gender in general, ethnicity, or tenure. There are no summer disconnection moratoria. There are in the US, though, in some states. And we didn't find reinstatement of electricity at the beginning of a moratorium, as is the case in Ontario for the winter truce period. Are these disconnection bans effective? So it's really up to how you measure effectiveness. If it depends on registration, well, there are always people missing out. And if it isn't based on that, it's sort of no one. Even the EDF scheme is not able to get everyone back onto a regular contract or even stop disconnections by everyone. But there's very little evidence out there on the outcomes, full stop, often by the companies themselves. There are very few reports and not a single report that looks at the householders and how they felt when they were protected from disconnection. Lessons for Australia. So I thought we were doing badly, but we're not doing that badly at all. It's actually quite good here. So our disconnection rate of 0.23% in the last financial year compares favorably with France and Ireland and Spain. We are doing great in some aspects. So we have very broad criteria of people who are being protected. So anyone who's suffering financially, irrespective of health or income, is protected as long as they engage and are still trying to pay off their payment programs. No disconnection for those who've applied for grants and concessions, etc. But still, when we look at that, people may be missing out. There's a minimum debt level of $300, so it's probably a bit low now, but at least there is this threshold. And we get our bills relatively often, so we have control over how much we're consuming and how much it costs. But there are still disconnections. We have protections similar to Ireland, but our hardship programs and prepayment plan programs, they're not effective, and almost half of hardship programs or more than half of payment plans are cancelled, so all these customers are then at risk of disconnections again. What may be potential benefits for energy companies not to disconnect? Well, avoidance of bad debt, because once you disconnect someone, that's it. There's reputational damage and fines for wrongful disconnections, and perhaps better consumer trust. But there is a cost as well. So in the last financial year, the total debt of customers that have been disconnected was almost $18 million. The profits by the electricity industry were almost $760 million. So about 2.3% of the profit was gone because people didn't pay their bill and were disconnected. We've got a very different context in Australia. We don't have a social movement around energy. We don't have Robin Hoods of energy. We don't have widespread smart meter tampering, so I don't pay all the energy I use, or illegal disconnections because people are struggling and they know where to find people who are quite able to circumvent the smart meters. And this is the case in France and Spain. But whatever the cost is, EDF and DESA are big companies. So maybe they can afford it. If we have small companies here, they may, if everyone sort of was not allowed to disconnect, they may have an unfair burden. Some retailers may pull out, and it may be higher energy prices, and we already have that not equally distributed across Australia. And retailers with lower customers' arrears would have a competitive advantage. So what should we do? I think there needs to be a real conversation about how costs of disconnection prohibitions may be distributed, but also I think there needs to be the recognition that householders who do not pay or do not engage are not the unwilling customers. So EDF did a lot of marketing research in the 1990s, and then they decided not to disconnect anyone. So really looking forward to that conversation around that, and thank you to energy consumers for allowing that conversation to start happening.